And we're in. Hello!
Hey! Hello, everybody. And welcome to another episode of Space at the Table, our open discussion show where we talk about all sorts of things. We have some very exciting topics coming up. That's not to say that today's topic is not exciting, but we have some very exciting guests coming up as well. But today, we're going to be doing the second part of our discussion about the One D&D test materials that are being regularly published by Wizards of the Coast as they create a new system out of an old system and refine the current system into a non-sequential numbered system for us to play D&D in.
That's a lot of systems, isn't it?
There is, yes. And today we're going to be talking about expert classes, which is the second of the Unearthed Arcana that they have said. Charlie says we look like evil in good conscience right now.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't trust anybody that dresses that much white.
I mean, normally people complain because I wear too much black, but sure, whatever. So yes, thank you for joining us. It really means so much to us for you guys to pop in and say hi, and please drop any questions or any comments that you have, or anything that you think that you have noticed about all of this in the comments, and we will try and get through all of the stuff we wanted to talk about in the next hour before we raid the wonderful Wicked game, because it's Wednesday.
Yeah. Do we want to tell them who we are?
I suppose we should.
Probably a good place to start, isn't it? For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Mepham. I use the pronouns he, him. I have the absolute honour of being the DM for our main ongoing campaign, Some Other Heroes. I'm an illustrator, a geek, an all-round nerd, and I have been playing D&D on and off for 30 years now. So it's really exciting for me to see this sort of going through a period of change. And with me and hosting today's event is co-hosting. Hosting is the angel to my devil.
It's a line that's never been said. But yes, hi everyone. To those of you who don't know me, my name is Wayne Fick. I am an art director and a brand coach and designer. And I also play in our main D&D live play campaign called Some Other Heroes, which you may have heard of because it's very good. And I have been playing D&D on and off, although mostly off until about 2 or 3 years ago, ever since the original Red Box. But as you can tell, I am very old. But today we're going to be talking about how D&D is evolving, which is fantastic. And I think there's some really exciting things in this test material, which we will get to in a second. We just have someone that we'd like to give a shout out to.
Yes, so we're really excited for two reasons. One, our friend on the internet, the amazing Ursidice, their Kickstarter hit its target and beyond, which means that they have been able to give themselves and their wonderful creative team a bonus, which is, as a creative, that's always lovely to hear. Also, they will be joining us, certainly them, but maybe a couple of members of their team, depending on scheduling, next week to talk not only about the amazing you meet in a tavern, you die in a dungeon, but also about being a game developer in the modern TTRPG space, where to start, anything else we can sort of pick their brains about. So in the coming week, we will, as we have done in the past, we'll be fielding to all of you and asking you to give us any sort of questions you might have around about building games and becoming a game designer and being a developer and being an indie game developer particularly. So please keep an eye on our socials for that. All right, I think that's the only announcement we've really got today.
Yeah, I think let us move into talking about One D&D. So a couple of things to remember, which I know we mentioned before on our last discussion about this, that these are, of course, play materials. They are playtest materials that are put out and are not final. So these are specifically out there for us to try and for us to feed back on. And as such, they have already warned us that a lot of this could change. But it is one of the best opportunities we've had to really shape the game for ourselves going forward. So I would encourage you all, please, to go and to download the materials, have a look at it yourself, try it if you can. But even if you just read through it and then feed back to them when they ask for feedback, so that we really do have a say in kind of shaping the game. The link to where you can find this on D&D Beyond, I've just put into the chat. So please go and have a look, download it, and have a read through. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, particularly in this playtest, there are 3 classes, and they have specifically said, with the classes in particular, they're working out power levels, and things may change multiple times before the playtest is over. So if something seems really strong and you're like, ooh, that feels broken, don't worry. They're probably aware of it, and they will fix it, but let them know anyway. Cool. So
instead of taking the usual route with D&D, the community, it appears, and just shouting at them on Twitter, we actually have a chance to put stuff forward. So please let them know if there's anything that doesn't work for you.
So, what's in this playtest? There are 3 classes, each with 1 subclass each. Bard, Rangers, and Rogues. There are also further feats added onto the first level feats in the previous playtest. These ones are mostly 4th level, kind of indicating sort of this sort of restructuring of how feats are more important to this version of D&D, and also kind of hinting more along the lines of the idea that there might be sort of skill tree elements to it without directly building a skill tree.
Yeah, some of these feats kind of build on the level 1 feats, so you can see how they're working that kind of almost skill tree concept into it. Also, we're not going to go through the subclasses today.
Yeah.
A couple of things we might mention, but in general, we're focusing on the main class just because of time, and we can always come back and do more about that if it's helpful. So let us know if that would be helpful for you.
It is excellent. In addition to feats, there is also epic boons, which is something that we've seen before. But they are making more of an emphasis on them, which is we'll kind of talk about a little bit more.
Which I find impossible to say without saying epic boon.
So if we ever get to the point of epic boons, I am expecting everybody around my table, whatever table it is, to shout that every time they choose one.
Yeah.
Also, further updates to the rules, some changes of terms, some clarifications, tweaks, the sort of thing that we're kind of expecting as they kind of nail down how this is all going to look.
And just a quick reminder on the rules and tweaks that they are making to some of those glossaries of rules is that they have said that each subsequent Unearthed Arcana kind of replaces that of the one before in terms of those rules. So for playtest purposes, if there is a change to a particular rule in last Unearthed Arcana and then in this one, this is the one that they are now working on as the one to test. So that's just a small thing to remember if you find 2 that conflict.
Awesome. So I guess now we need to ask, what is an expert? So people who have played sidekicks at any point in time will already recognize the term. An expert is a class who is an expert in a field. In this particular instance, it covers rogues, rangers, bards, and artificers, which is a very interesting set. So it kind of puts bards takes bards away from spellcasters and puts them back in the traditional unit, which they used to be. For anybody who played older edition, bard was a subclass of thief, if I remember correctly. Was I
did not know that.
Was one of the prestige classes, I think, that came along a little bit later. So what that means is they're trying to create like these class groups, and they're called experts, mages, priests, and warriors. And one of the reasons they're doing is that there will be particular feats, magical items, maybe even spell effects or like other skill effects that only affect a particular class group. So warriors, for example, may only be able to take certain feats, as may experts or mages, just to kind of make it a little bit easier. What
I
else?
think it makes sense in that even just at the very most basic level, it means that they don't have to specify each individual class
Yeah.
that something applies to. They can start to refine it based on these groups, which kind of does make sense. And actually, the groupings that we have seen so far do make sense where they've put people
Yeah.
or put classes. So
Yeah. But again,
I do think it works.
if people go, no, this doesn't work for me, they might tweak it. We'll see.
Mhm.
So what else has changed around the classes that are presented here? Class builds now include suggested build, for example, feats and spells all the way from first level through to 20th. This is to help build your character quicker, and for more, particularly for less experienced players, it might be your first time through, or people who are just building on the fly. It just gives you something that's always there that's suggested. You don't have to take it, but it means that if you're like, I'm really stuck, well, at least you know, like from the core rules, this will be easier to use.
I mean, for me, I think this is a really cool thing for them to do because I think there are a lot of people who love just being so specific about what they create and how they create it and what they pick from.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of us, myself included, that sometimes have overwhelmed by the options. And so having something that you can say, okay, well, I can at least start with that. And then that kind of feeds into one of the changes about being able to change your spells on a long rest.
Yeah.
At least you've got something to start with. Even if at your first long rest you change things, it gives you a suggested starting point. And I think, particularly for new players, I think is good because it gives you the flexibility if you're an advanced player, but
Yeah.
gives you a starting point.
So something that both Bard and Ranger players will be pleased to hear. Both classes now swap out spells on the long rest. So they can choose different things. You are no longer stuck with the same spells for the whole of your leveling, and you have to wait until you level to kind of change things out, which I think is really, really good and will make for greater versatility for both those classes. So other thing is most of the classes here have something that's updated in terms of features, even if that's descriptions and things like that. The one that's had the least change is probably Rogue, and I think when they were talking about it, they said basically Rogue still needs tweaks and sort of reviews, but it is the one that most people were like, please don't touch this.
I think they said pretty much across the board with Rogue when they asked for feedback on individual parts of the structure of the class before. The results they got were kind of 90% plus favorable for pretty much everything about Rogue.
Yeah.
So I don't think they would play too much with it.
Yeah. All classes will have a more even spread of features through their levels. So everybody now gets something at each level, whether that's a class feature, a subclass feature, a feat, or in the cases of Bard and Ranger here, there are levels they get a whole new spell level to play with. So there's no more of this, I have to wait 2 levels before I get anything interesting again, which I think is really nice and exciting and kind of fun for most players. Epic boons are replacing the level 20 feature, as we mentioned before. These are very, very powerful feats. They make feats which are generally quite good look like little paper swords and things like that. They're excellent. They're a lot of fun. They're gonna make players who do reach level 20 feel like demigods, which is how you want to feel.
Kind of right, yeah.
They haven't got rid of the level 20 features from the classes. They've moved them back 2 levels to level 18, which means you get them earlier and you get to play with them much.
And again, for a lot of the classes, there was a big gap between kind of 16 and 18 in
Yeah.
terms of what you got. So 16 and 20, rather. So it kind of makes sense that they've moved them there. Also, to be fair, if you've managed to get the people together enough and work through scheduling conflicts, etc., to get your players to reach level 20 in a game and actually finish it, I think you deserve an epic boon.
I think you do as well. And for those of you who are like, what's an epic boon? Epic boons have always existed. they were part of the DM's guide, but they're one of those things that so few players get to level 20 that they really don't get to see them very often. And I think even a lot of DMs, I certainly forgot they existed until they were brought up again. Yeah. Equipment lists, that's harder to say than you think, have been updated. So you'll get your suggested equipment list, or you can dump it and you just take a gold amount based on your class, which you can spend on what you need. Ability score improvement is no longer a class feature. Instead, it is now a feat that you can choose when you take a feat, starting from 4th level. Effectively, it doesn't change the ability, what it does, but what it means is that you don't have to be so tied. So it's taking feats from being an optional thing that your DM may let you do to being a structured part of building a character. Which with the new guides makes it a lot easier to do anyway. So.
And in some ways, it's just a terminology in some ways, because you can still choose to take an ability score improvement every time and no feat as we used to know them. But it is now you taking that feat, the ability score feat, that's all.
Amazing. Now, if you think it's a bit weird why we're going through all this, well, we are aware as people who are enthusiasts of these sort of things, that when you open the UA, the first thing you're going to do is jump straight into the juicy bits. The first thing I looked at was my favorite classes, and then I read the rest of it. So what we're doing here today is we're going to focus primarily, because we know we've only got an hour, we're going to focus primarily on the things that you may not have seen or may not have picked up on whilst you were skimming through, just to kind of give you an overview. And then we will go through as much of the class change stuff as we possibly can after that. So we're on to rules changes. So you remember our complaint with the last one, where we said we didn't like the natural 20 rule gave you an inspiration. Well, that's changed. All the other roles have gone back to how they were in the original 5e, but now when you roll a 1, you get an inspiration. I kind of like this more than the natural 21, but I'm kind of the whole sort of, I don't know whether that's just because I've got used to the idea or because I think it's better.
I'm still unsure as to what they're trying to do with it, because for me, the whole point behind rolling those natural ones is that it is literally called a critical fail. And critical fails always fail. So it almost feels like a sort of slight consolation prize if you fail.
Oh, there you
but
go.
It also, but even pity inspiration. Yeah, that's brilliant. But for me, the problem with that is that it doesn't work sort of thematically in terms of the storyline and things like that. A critical fail is a fail. And although I think, Chris, you suggested it could be, the implication is that you kind of learn from your failure. But for me, the point is that a critical fail is like the worst thing that can happen when you roll. Yeah. So I feel like having a critical fail and then going, but it's okay because I get inspiration, kind of takes the sting away a bit. And I'm still not sure what they're doing with it, so it still doesn't work for me.
I can see a lot of this disappearing. I think it will come back to inspiration is a DM's gift. But what I keep pushing for whenever they talk, I get an opportunity to talk about it, is clearer guides on the sorts of things that DMs can give players inspiration for, so that newer DMs are more comfortable doing so, and older DMs might kind of have something that they can refer back to, and they're like, okay, yeah, that's no fine. And if you do have an epic fail and your player does it in a really comical way, by all means, you might want to give them an inspiration as a sort of thank you for role playing that so beautifully. But I don't think that dice should decide where inspiration. I'm of that school of thought. I don't feel that.
I agree with it. I just feel like it's not as special when you do it this way. Charlie asked, "Isn't there another game system that rewards you for failure?" She thinks that Taz used it briefly.
I'm not sure about Taz. I know Call of Cthulhu, all your experience growth is built around the idea that you learn more from failing than you do from succeeding. So I don't know if they were using one of the similar systems to that. In Call of Cthulhu, if you fail a roll for whatever reason, you mark it, and then when you gain experience, you can put that skill up with your experience points if you want to, which I actually really love as a system. Oh, Rooney's just said it's Monster of the Week.
Monster of the Week, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yes. So that makes sense. So Monster of the Week is a similar sort of. It's a horror-based game whereby if you survive a situation, you're going to learn from your failures much more than you are from what you're already good at.
Yeah, and that kind of does make sense, but I'm still not sure what the point is in it.
Yeah.
And just what Hedge said, inspiration is for when you stick to your character values, even when it's counterintuitive to you or to the party.
Yeah.
So for them, that's what I love about it, though. Each DM has their own kind of way of doing it, but I think that that's really cool. I think that I prefer that. So anyway.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think come stay with the DMs, please, wizards. So I'm excited about this next one, and I think a lot of other players will be. 2-weapon fighting has improved drastically. So the first thing to note, finesse weapons are no longer called finesse weapons. They are now just light weapons. If you have a light weapon in both hands, you can use them both as part of the same attack.
I feel like I should have props.
For example, Wayne is an expert in pencil and pen attacks. If he attacks the ogre that has just burst into his room, he can do so at the same time. This is really, really good for classes like Rogue, who have a tendency to end up with those sorts of builds anyway. Your dual wield feat still works the same. It adds your proficiency bonus to the second strike.
But if you don't have that feat, your second strike, you do not add your proficiency bonus.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you... it's kind of worth noting that this is really good for characters who want to do stuff with their bonus action but still want to use both their weapons. And I don't think it's broken because generally light weapons do less damage. So you will be able to keep up with your friends with their big mace a little bit better, which I think is a really, really great way of changing that up. And I think it's probably something that a lot of people are going to enjoy, and I can see a lot of people going, please, can we keep this?
And I think just with Charlie, joking, saying dual wield ballistas. Funny enough, it's something I joked about because one of the other things they've changed is that although some people have played it this way already, now equipping and unequipping weapons as part of your attack, excuse me, has been clarified, and it is now part of your movement, part of your attack rather.
Yeah, your attack.
So you can use it as part of that single action rather than at the moment the rules say that for some things you use an action or a bonus action to unsheath a weapon, etc. And now they've made it very clear how that works.
Yeah, they've clarified what was already there, but made it so that there's no confusion around it anymore. And there's a lot of that in these rules, to be fair. Cool. Shall we talk about exhaustion?
Yeah.
I'm excited about this too. I get this evil grin as a DM, you can tell, can't you, with the things that I like. So, exhaustion...
And then you say really weird things like, I'm excited about exhaustion, which is weird.
It is weird. Exhaustion has been overhauled, and I quite like it. So, you still get exhaustion under the same terms that you have always done through spell use, certain status effects, and from not resting. What happens now is before you had 1 to 5 and each of them kind of had an impact on how your character functions, it now runs to 10. Each time you get a level of exhaustion, it subtracts 1 from your D20 tests and from your DC spell casting effect. So what that means is if you have 7 points of exhaustion, please don't get 7 points of exhaustion, and roll a 13 for a skill check, it would actually end up being 6. Or if you cast Fireball and your DC is normally 17, your opponents would only have to roll a 10 to succeed. I like this. You still lose exhaustion over a long rest. If you reach 10, your character dies. So that hasn't changed from that side. I like this change. I think this is such a neat and fairer way of doing things, and it kind of makes it feel like taking a couple of points of exhaustions to get where you want to feels like it's worth doing as a player.
I think the two things that struck for me was, At first, I wasn't sure why this was really needed, but then talking to you, Chris, about explaining how there were ways around exhaustion if
Yeah.
you were a magic caster, because you could do it without having to actually make an attack roll, so you didn't get disadvantage, things like that. It now does seem fairer, and I do also think, from a story point of view, it before exhaustion was such a daunting concept that often you would never risk it most of the time. But now it does feel like, actually, if it's just going to take one or two off, it might be worth us, pushing through the night, or
Yeah.
traveling all night instead of resting. Or so I do think it adds a little more to what's possible without it feeling massively overwhelming to be exhausted.
That monster that gave several of our party members 3 or 4 points of exhaustion, is it worth us having a rest now, or do we push on because actually we need to get somewhere? This is.
But at least you don't have disadvantage on
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, grappled condition has been updated and cleaned up. So your movement still becomes 0. You now have disadvantage on attack rolls against anyone other than the grappler. And the grappler can lift and move you, but if they do so, they are given the slowed condition, which we'll talk about in a second. Again, nothing game breaking. Sorry, you can escape the grapple through the means that you're used to as well. So like strength or dex saving throw at the end of each turn. Also, spells or knocking out the person who is currently grappling you.
Yeah. I mean, this just makes sense to me. Even when you just read it bit by bit, it's like, yeah, that makes total sense that you would have, disadvantage of attack rolls other than the person who's holding you, because you can't reach them. You're restricted. Your movement is restricted, etc. So it's nice that they've clarified it.
Cool. So we'll move on to the slowed condition. And I think that this is kind of quite neat, and this is setting up. I think that we might see the slow spell adapt a little bit, so it's a less complicated thing to deal with. The slowed is now a condition. Any movement costs you 1 extra foot for each foot moved. For example, if you move 10 feet, it costs you 20 feet. Or as Wayne says, you half your movement.
That took me a lot of time to read through that and try and figure out what they were talking about, costing you an extra foot for each. I was like, oh, right, so basically your movement's halved. Got it. Okay,
effectively, your movement's halved, but you can, like, if you suddenly pick something up and then you've already used like most of your movement and you want to kind of move it on, then it's kind of why they've worded it that way. Attacks against you have advantage. Makes sense. Your arms are busy.
You're easier to hit.
Yeah, you're easier to hit. You have disadvantage on dex saves. Again, also easy to understand.
You're moving slower, so it's harder to get out the way.
Having a condition for this also means that spells that affect you with slowed means that you kind of go, okay, cool, I know what I'm doing. I know where to look that up. That's fine. Other things that have been updated. Hiding is now a condition called hidden, which makes sense. It's always been there. It works mechanically the same. It just has a mechanical description of it. Incapacitated has been updated. The biggest thing in here is you cannot speak. Apparently, there have been some chatty corpses over the years. Influence. No, influence is a new action. And I like this. So it's basically what a lot of players try and do during actions as well, which is talk down NPCs, bring people onto their side, social challenges through combat situations. How they've done this now is they've structured it up so it's an active action that everyone can take. I think why they've done this is because, particularly with the experts, there are some subclasses and classes that will get part of their feature to be able to do this as a bonus action. So you can cast a spell and try and chat to the person next to you and get them to help you. They've also done this with searching. Now there's search and study, which kind of breaks those skills up into different types of things. So searching is more passive stuff like perception, insight, and the like. Study is literally going through papers, unlocking things, that sort of stuff. And again, simply designed to try and make it all work and be more understandable for newer players and more direct terminology. And it kind of really plays into a lot of the stuff that's here for the rogue as well.
I think it also it kind of clarifies what you can and can't do, so that, because I know there's a lot of times during combat that you have to say, like, can I search for that here while combat's going on? Can I look for that piece of paper, whatever? Now it's really easy. Nobody has to worry about, like, oh, I don't know whether I should let you do that, or from a DM's point of view, you know what the rules are for that. So it just makes it that much slicker to make things happen quickly.
Hedge says, you mean I can't trick my DM into letting me search, talk, and attack in one turn anymore? No. You can do
only if
one
you're
of those
incapacitated.
things. 2 if you're a rogue. What if I search the enemy's body with my knife? That's between you and your knife.
Hey, Rock has searched bodies with a rapier, so why not?
Oh dear. Next thing we want to talk about is jump. Jump has been overhauled. It is no longer based on your strength score. It is now based on a strength-based roll. Your base DC is 10 unless the DM says otherwise. Even if you fail, you still jump 5 feet. You can use either acrobatics or athletics with your strength to use it. If you don't make a 10-foot run up before you jump, the check is at disadvantage. The successful check determines how much further you can jump. The number you roll on the dice is the number of feet that you can jump, or halved if you're doing it vertically. For example, if you roll a 14, you can jump 14 feet horizontally or 7 vertically. If you use the jump action, it does not take from your movement, but the distance you can jump can never exceed your personal speed.
Which kind of makes sense, considering the personal speeds you have in D&D.
Yeah.
I have to agree with Nikki. I did read these and I didn't think jump was such a sort of contested thing that they needed to clarify. But, it's good. Also, Nikki, you saying I love jumping, well, I can only hear that with you saying it in Sunny's voice. So,
well, you love jumping.
I don't know why.
And Hedge says, sounds very similar to Starfinder. That may be because this is probably falls more in lines with things like 3rd edition and 3.5, where these sorts of mechanics were kind of structured in a very different way. What else we do? So we've done search study. Tool proficiencies have been updated to include the extra elements expanded upon in Xanathars. To explain, if you have a proficiency in a tool, you can add that proficiency to a skill check that you used. If you're also proficient in the skill that you're using, you gain advantage. So those rogues with I'm proficient in thieves' tools, and I'm proficient in sleight of hand. Suddenly, you are so much better at opening locks.
Yeah, because they struggle now.
Yeah, because they struggle at the moment with reliable talent and the like.
But again, it is clarifying it, so that makes sense.
Cool. So before we jump into the
sorry, Sweet Poison says, so you can jump your walk speed. You could if you manage to roll 55 on the dice. So yeah.
There are 2 spells that are listed in the rules as well, if you can find them. They nearly snuck past me. They have been tweaked and they've been put back in here because they particularly relate to 2 of the classes that are here. One of them, we love the change. One of them, we'll see. Barkskin has been updated. Barkskin is now a bonus action rather than an action. It's still a touch spell and still a 2nd level concentration. Instead of setting AC to 16, now they gain temporary hit points equal to your spellcasting modifier plus proficiency at the start of each of their turns. You can increase the number of targets with this spell at 1 per level beyond 2nd level. Yeah. I really like this. This is so much better than the current version.
The current version just doesn't scale at all. But Druid was one of my first real sort of long-term characters and or classes that I played, and Barkskin was such a great spell when I got it, and then very quickly realized that there was absolutely no point in it.
Yeah.
So I do think that this works better from a practical point of view in terms of scaling.
Brilliant. Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is a much better. I prefer this version of Barkskin. The second one, we've had a lot of back and forth with this week, and it's Guidance. So I think this one's been updated as it's currently, thanks to Critical Role, one of the most overused spells in the game. And I think it was driving DMs to distraction. It is still a cantrip, but it no longer requires concentration. Its casting time is now a reaction. The range has been moved from touch to 30 feet. All very good things. The spell still gives someone an extra d4, but only can be applied when they fail an ability check. They can only be targeted by the spell once per long rest.
So each player in your party, each character player can play a character can only be targeted by guidance once
Yeah,
per long rest.
yeah. No more. I think I'm going to Guidance. I want to Guidance. It is right. Choose your moment and wait to see whether this is something that is worth doing. Also, the balance off on this one is, of course, if they roll a natural one, there is absolutely no reason to guide them on this at all. But if they're close to, if you're like 14, 15, you're like, and the DM says, oh, that nearly hits, you're like, I will guide that. That kind of makes the spell, for me, it makes the spell feel less trivial. The problem I'm worried about is going to be very hard to keep track for who's had guidance and who hasn't.
Yes. But I do think the onus now falls to, and we'll talk about another thing that's like this shortly, but I do think the onus then falls to the person who gives guidance to keep an eye on where it's most useful. So I do think that I get that it's overused, because I have seen and watched games where people are guiding someone for everything they do, whether it's reading a book or opening a door or whatever, and it does get a bit much. However, there is still part of me that feels that if you used your guidance on somebody for a failed roll once during that day, but then there is a massively important roll later on, I feel like that could really just feel like you've wasted it without having the ability to use it at least twice on somebody. So, but that's having not played a cleric really with using guidance that much. Open to kind of seeing how it works.
Yeah. Also, one thing you did point out is like it kind of punishes small tables as well, because you run out of uses much quicker than you will if you've got like 5 or 6 people around the table.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes, because I have a feeling that one might be tweaked slightly so it scales better.
Yeah. I mean, Nikki said, stop clerics feeling like they need to be a guidance machine, which I have definitely seen that. As soon as Chris kind of mentioned that, I was like, yeah, I've seen that quite a lot.
Yeah. Okay, so should we talk about a class?
Ooh, let's
talk about a class. Let's talk about the Ranger. So, my overview on this one: it has been tightened up, and it is a version. It feels like a much cleaner, neater version of the playtest that they put out for Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. It is a much, much stronger version of the Ranger than in the Player's Handbook, because so much of the Player's Handbook stuff is interesting, but it's all circumstantial, whereas this is actively useful. I think this looks like a lot of fun to play. I'm a Ranger fan myself. Of the class, not the sports team. Yay, go sports. I think this is, but I am happy. I've been playing, when I've been playing Ranger, I have been playing the Tasha's version anyway.
And I have seen a lot of people mentioning before, in the last couple of years, that Ranger always feels a little underpowered. That's kind of something that's thrown around a lot when you look online about different classes. So I do think what they've done is kind of stepping it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go through some feature changes here. We'll start at first level. You get the favored enemy, which is completely different from anything that you might see in books at the moment. You get Hunter's Mark at first level. It is always prepared for you as a spell. If you cast it, you are not concentrating on it, which is lovely. So this is initially may feel very strong, but there are actually some clever balances here. No concentration means that a ranger can use its second spell slot on one of its other spells. I think anyone who's played ranger knows that they have a lot of concentration-based spells, which means that if you kind of end up in a situation where you're like, I have to choose this or I use Hunter's Mark, now you can use both. It's really good. It feels much less complicated to explain than Natasha's variant, which has a lot more conditions applied to how it works, which I think is a good thing, because when they released Natasha's version, it's like you can use it a number of times equal to your proficiency, but each time you have to recast it, and it's a bit messy, and it didn't kind of work as well as everybody had hoped it would. You still have to use a spell slot to cast it, which means that there is a payoff there, and you only have 2 of those until level 3.
Yeah. So again, it is. I can see how they're balancing stuff, and you can see it's very clear that they are making. They're thinking about how to balance that, because the fact that it is also it's always prepared for you, so it doesn't count towards your spell number allowance. Initially, I was like, wow, that's quite big that you've got that and you don't have to concentrate on it. But then you can see where the balance comes in.
Brilliant. The next thing you get at first level is expertise in 2 skills, which is lovely. The payoff for this one is that the ranger loses its bonus languages, which I think is sad, because that's just one of those features that's kind of been with ranger for a long time. They travel to lots of different lands, so they encounter lots of people and they learn their languages. So
thematically, that was nice.
Thematically, that was nice. I love expertise, though, so I'm not going to complain about that. Spellcasting is now first level for rangers. All spells come from the primal list, but you cannot use evocation spells. Fine. Fairly straightforward. So with what we're kind of seeing with this one is, as we sort of said before, they've neatened the spell lists up, so your class will choose from a spell list rather than have a spell list for itself. The evocation restriction makes sense because it's not sort of a rangery thing. We'll see something very similar with the bards when we chat about them in a little bit as well, if we get to them. If not, one of the things Wayne and I said, if we don't get through everything, we might put out another video just to YouTube or something covering some of the stuff that we haven't reached. Spells can be swapped out on a long rest, and you prepare your spells based on the slots you have each level. So what this means is, if you have a level 3 spell slot, 2 level 2 spell slots, and 3 level 3 level 1 spell slots, you can prepare 3 level 1 spells, 2 level 2 spells, and 1 level 3 spell. So some people might feel that kind of takes away a little bit from your flexibility, but I actually think it's much neater. And I think if they're going to carry, we'll see how this carries over, whether it's for the same for big casters like Wizard and Druid and Cleric. But certainly for this sort of caster, half caster, it feels really, really good and easy to do. And you're like, okay, I've used all my second level spells. I can move on. I can just grab something else.
I also think it's one of the things it does do, because I know from playing a lot of spellcasters, I think it does encourage you to use lower level spells a lot more as well. Because often I find that in big fights and things like that, I know that I'm going to use my level 4 spell slots.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I don't use the smaller ones because I know I'm focusing on those big hitters and I'm kind of stacking that. So I do think it kind of works.
And those spells still scale up as well.
Yeah, and like Scott says, with everyone being able to change out spells, it's simpler.
It is. It's much simpler for them. Yes, You're right, Scott. So, second level, fighting styles. As we mentioned before, fighting styles are now feats. Rangers get to choose from specific ones available from the fighting style feats: archery, defense, and 2-weapon fighting. All familiar, all work exactly the same. Subclasses appear at 3rd level, and you get features at 6th, 10th, and 14th. All of those are 1 level sooner than the 5th edition Ranger. And I think that seems to be universal at the moment. The same for all the classes and subclasses. So we're not going to go through subclasses today, just because there is so much in this document. Feats appear at 4th, 8th, 12th, 16th, and 19th level, exactly the same as they are. Obviously, we've already discussed the fact that feats are now replacing ability score improvement, unless you take the ability score improvement feat. Extra attack is exactly where it's always been. Roving. Roving is an improved version of the feature from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. You gain 10 to your walking speed, and you gain climbing and swimming speed equal to your walking speed. I like this. This makes the ranger very mobile on the battlefield, but still not quite as fast as the monk or the barbarian.
However, monk and barbarian don't have the climbing and swimming speed.
Yeah. I mean, monks run up
Monk
across.
can run up a wall, but
that's cheating.
Again, thematically, it does mean ranger has a bit more. It's not just standard across the board.
The next feature is tireless. So it is similar to the one that appears in Tasha, but it works slightly different. You gain temporary hit points equal to 1d8 plus your proficiency on a short or long rest. When you finish a short rest, you lose a point of exhaustion. So the thing that's weaker than the Tasha's version is that on Tasha's version, you can use this as an action a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus. So it's kind of like a second wind sort of thing for rangers.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's to try and make them feel more distinct from fighters. But I kind of think that it might shift back towards the Tasha's one, because that one felt like it had more uses as opposed to I have to sleep to get this to work.
Yeah.
At 13th level, you get Nature's Veil, which is the same as Tasha's, but a little weaker again. You can use a bonus action to spend a spell slot to turn invisible. In Tasha's, this is a use per number of use per proficiency again. So you're utilizing a different resource in order to be able to become invisible. So that feels much, much weaker.
It does feel, I mean, having to use a spell slot is very different from being able to use it at will. And I think that's, we'll see how they keep that in, but it does make a big difference.
I feel like it's one of the ones that people are going to push back on and say this needs to be stronger.
Or maybe they just don't want rangers to be invisible all the time.
I mean, they're waiting until 13th, waiting until 10th level for this.
That's true.
But they could always swap it for the next one if they're really that worried about it. Feral Sense. You gain blind sight to 30 feet. It's fun. I think blind sight is always useful. 30 feet is quite big.
Yeah.
But at 15th level, you're dealing with stuff that kind of moves between dimension and the like. So is it going to be as functionally useful as it might be earlier in the game?
I mean, it's quite late.
It does feel very late to me, but then Foe Slayer. Hunter's Mark becomes a D10 damage rather than 1d6 when you use it. I like this. I feel it's an improvement to what's tougher than Tasha. Although Tasha's scales better across the levels. So from Tasha's, you start at 1d4, then you got to 1d6, 1d, and then eventually 1d8. The eventual place you reach on this version of Foe Slayer is much nicer.
And in Tasha's, it's still called Favored Foe, is that right?
It's called Favored Foe, yeah. So that is effectively where Ranger is at. I quite like it. I think there are some things that can be tweaked, but I think it feels to me a lot more fun to play directly than in the base player handbook.
Yeah,
I can feel a lot of that sort of stuff kind of carrying across to the new version when it eventually comes out in 2014.
And I know with Ranger particularly, I know it's one of your favorite sort of classes,
Yeah,
and I know as soon as you read this, you were kind of excited to try it.
yeah,
Like it, it's great when you can see the changes make people excited to try it. I
yeah.
think that's always a great sign.
2014. I'm in 2024. 2014. I'm going back in time. 2014, of course, was when the last edition was released. Shall we have a brief chat about Bard before we let these wonderful
Yeah,
people go and watch some actual play?
we've got a few minutes.
We got a few minutes. So, Bard.
Hmm.
Let's talk about spellcasting. As we said before, you can swap out spells on a long rest.
Yay!
Yay! Spells are prepared based on the spell slots you have rather than an arbitrary number created by somebody. I think it roughly works out about the same. There is no longer a spells known. Wonderful. I think this is much fairer to bards who have practically been a main caster, but have not had the same benefits of a lot of them. Yeah. So you can take from the new arcane spell list, but you must be from the schools of divination, enchantment, illusion, or transmutation. So thematically following the bard's current trend, but allowing you to kind of dip into other things later.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about the two big changes to this bard, one of which is interesting and the other one is bardic inspiration. Bardic inspiration is based on your level. So it's based on your proficiency
On your
bonus,
proficiency bonus.
which means you start with 2.
Yeah.
It is no longer gifted to be held by another player. It is a reaction feature you choose to use when they fail a roll.
So exactly what they said with guidance.
Yeah. Can also be used to heal on a roll of the bardic inspiration a creature that has just taken damage. Don't hate that second bit.
Yeah.
Understand that it's kind of taking the onerous off of that player to remember that they are holding on to a bardic inspiration.
Yeah.
The number of bard dice is massively reduced early on, but gets more later.
Yeah. And for me, that's just, I guess the thing for me with this, playing a bard now, and I now understand the versatility of playing a bard, but I do feel like I'm not sure I understand why it was necessary to do this with bardic inspiration, because it does mean that in a party of 5, the bard can only do 3 uses of bardic inspiration, even at level 8.
Yeah.
And for me, that feels really weird when you've worked so hard to get to this point with bardic inspiration. So I think that's a really, it's just an odd one. And that's what I say, I'm always open to kind of finding out why, but I'm not sure why they needed to make it a change that much.
Yeah.
I do like the fact that it's not going to be something that is kind of wasted sometimes because people forget to use it. So that I think is great. And the healing, yeah, I think that's great because I can choose to use that if I've got it, as a heal, and that a couple of points can save someone's life.
Well, it's good that you like the healing because you're a healer now.
Yeah, this is the part I'm not so keen on.
Songs of Restoration. So you get additional spells that you can take at certain levels. It basically expands your spell list. Lovely, always love that.
And they don't count towards your chosen spells.
Also good, always really good. All of them are healing based.
Yep.
All of them. So you get healing word, you get lesser restoration, and things like that. My problem with this is it really does feel like you are forcing a bard down a particular path. It is problematic in as much as if they're talking about greater choice and more encouraging people to kind of play more their way, you're kind of telling bards that you're not allowed to do that anymore. I think later they might add a caveat that you can swap it out for other things. but I don't feel that you should force a bard to be one thing or the other. I think that they should have
However,
choices.
what I would say though is that often I take a healing spell as one of my chosen spells because I kind of feel like I should. I mean, in our party, it's a little odd because we don't really have a healer per se, so
Oops,
I
all
kind of am the
daughters.
healer. But yeah, but generally, bards do tend to take like a healing spell because you kind of feel like you should have something. So at least this way, it doesn't count towards your known spells. You get it, and
Yeah.
that's just one that you know it doesn't take away from another spell you can have. But I do feel like one of the joys of bard is how flexible it is, and you can basically shape it any way you want, and this does kind of force it down a bit of a healing part. The other thing, talking about bardic inspiration, is that we need to see how this kind of plays out with subclasses because they haven't done that yet
Yes.
with
Yeah.
all the subclasses. But bardic inspiration as a reaction like this means that essentially for a College of Creation bard, which is what I play in our Some Other Heroes campaign, the mote of potential concept, which is this kind of floating mote that surrounds someone who has been given inspiration, doesn't make sense anymore. So I guess it could be a mote that you could add as an extra, what if you choose to use the inspiration as a reaction, but then essentially it's just like giving them a bonus for that. It'd be interesting to see what they do with any of the features that rely on inspiration being given to someone as that has an added benefit. So we'll see.
Yeah. No, and I agree with that. And it's one of the first things that you and I picked up on when we were looking at this is like, well, hang on, how does that work now?
Yeah.
And I think as a DM, I had a couple of ideas of how I would change it, but it does feel like they've kind of, it's been a bit of an oversight when they were like building this, like one of their more popular subclasses has kind of been completely overlooked in a lot of respect. In general, with the rest of Bard, everything is there. It's in different places. Some of that is good. Some of it is jack of all trades at 5th level.
Yeah, but then magical secrets has been moved to 11 and font of inspiration to 7. So
Yeah,
there's it's there, it's just sort of shuffled around a bit.
yeah, absolutely. Magical secrets you only get twice as a bard now, but it's okay because I feel like that balance is quite nice against some of the extra bits and pieces that you do get, and it also.
Yeah.
Although we're not kind of diving into subclasses here, have a look at the College of Law subclass because they've made that subclass more law-y, if you
Yeah.
like. It kind of gets more for it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I did like about the change to Bard is the superior bardic inspiration. You
Yeah,
get it 18 now, and that means that you also always regain up to 2 uses of inspiration every time you roll initiative.
it's officially twice as good as the 5th edition one.
So, so that kind of makes sense. I like that because of that feeling of battle. But then we are talking about level 18.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if you get to level 18. Right. So rogues, we're only going to touch on very, very briefly. Effectively, apart from a couple of minor things, that Thieves' Cant is a language rather than a separate language of its own.
Yeah.
And they don't get blind sight. They get something called subtle strike, which I'm still trying to work out if it's a good thing or not. They are exactly as you expect them. And they're still good, they're still fun, they've cleared up and they've made it easier to understand when you can use things like sneak attack,
Yeah.
how you can use your bonus action basically rogue is now a bonus action monster. If you do not have something to do on your turn as a bonus action as a rogue, you're probably chained up, blindfolded and in a box somewhere because that's the only excuse that you might have for that one.
But do have a look as well because cunning action now hide as an action, having the hidden status obviously affects that, and so. But it's worth having a look through. But it is definitely clearer. I mean, I can understand when sneak attack is used, and that's saying something.
Yeah, sneak attack was one of those ones that took me a while to get my head around. And that is what we're going to touch on today. We might kind of put out a couple of videos to look at the subclasses for you all, or kind of touch on bits and pieces. But I think we kind of wanted to keep it small and sweet today, particularly since we said we're going to raid our friends over at Wicked Game.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah. So, if this has been useful, let us know. Please go and download the playtest, have a look through, make up some of your own minds, and let them know when they put out the questionnaire what you think.
And we will put something out on social letting you know when they start asking for feedback. So please do give them any feedback you've got.
They don't seem to be live yet. Hang on one second. We can vamp for a second.
Of course.
We are probably not going to do another one of these. We don't know. We're going to see. But one of the things we're thinking about doing instead is putting out small videos that kind of explain what we found instead. Probably straight up onto YouTube for you guys to absorb at your own leisure.
Yeah, I mean, we really enjoy these, and it's really helpful. I mean, it's certainly helpful for me to kind of talk these things through. However, with them putting stuff out, once every few weeks over the next couple of years, it's going to be a lot for us to keep doing it live. And so it might be more useful for people to have, YouTube videos that we can point to where people can refer to this kind of thing. But let us know if that would be useful, or if the live ones are better for you.
Awesome. And all that's left for us is to say thank you so much for spending this hour with us. We will be back next Wednesday with the fabulous Ursi
Dice. Yay!
Of course, some other heroes will be back this coming Sunday with the next episode and find out who Kaja is.
Yeah, god damn it.
Love you all.
Thank